Audible. Can you all hear me? Great. Okay. Give it a few seconds for others to log back on. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Almost there. A couple more people logging on, I think. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay. While we wait for others to log on, I'll just say that that's it for the 13th chapter. We got there. And I would love reflections or questions, anything that stood out about the super soul and how they're the source of all the senses, but they don't have material senses of their own. Or there's a section there about our relationship with the material nature, how the nature is the source of the source of all the transformations and experiences, but we're the source of our experience of suffering and pleasure. And there was a few verses there, 24 to 26, about how to approach a super soul, especially through hearing and being inclined to hearing, to actually realize the supreme. Anything from these verses that stood out? Any reflections? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, I have a question for you, Prabhu. So this was actually asked on Wisdom of the Sages this past week, or maybe it was last weekend. And it's been like in my head, and this kind of brings it up again too. And I would love to hear kind of your reflection on it. So the person had asked, gosh, there's a lot of stuff we do in Krishna consciousness, right? We can go to the temple and we can do service and we do our puja at our altars and we read the Gita, we read the Bhagavatam. We have to chant, if we're chanting, to the regular principles, we're chanting 16 rounds. Like that's a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, and some of this is like, well, Prabhupada just kind of told me I can listen and, I can download all this stuff and this is cool. And so I don't know if you can reflect because, as I move and mature in Krishna consciousness, it is, you keep adding these little 1%, right? You keep adding a little bit more bhakti as you grow. But there's a lot of stuff. And, for me, I hear like, chanting's the main thing. You got to do it. That's the thing. And hopefully you can make time for the other stuff. But like, what's the secret formula of, all of these amazing practices and things that we can do to access Krishna? Like it's, when you become overwhelmed thinking through like, well, what's the main thing and what should I really be doing to like do my best?
Right.
What is your take on that?
Yeah, there's so much that we can be doing there, and the instructions and they go into as much detail as you want. They're infinitely detailed and rich and deep, and there's so much history and example. Actually, this came up in the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, who he was faced by a very pious, very spiritually advanced person, but although sincere, this person said, I am bewildered because I don't know what I should do. Some people say I should do this practice or that practice. They actually had read all these different scriptures. They were a Brahmana. They were very spiritually, like their whole thing was like gathering spiritual knowledge, but they had so much they couldn't like put it all into context. So they were confused about what their dharma was, right? What they're supposed to do. And the thrust of that particular pastime and the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya in general and of his followers, including Srila Prabhupada, is that there are 5 main, most important angas or limbs, aspects of bhakti. In fact, there's 64 main ones, and each of the 64, some of them have subtypes, but of those, they're divided out into or condensed down to 5 main ones, which is really useful because you can't memorize 64 very easily, but you can memorize 5. And there's a nice verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where it's said, Mahaprabhu, Lord Chaitanya actually says in the Bengali, if I can remember how it goes, Sadhu Shanga Nama Kirtan Bhagavata Shravan Maturvas Shimurtira Shotaya Shevana. There's these 5 things. And then he says in the next verse, I'll translate them in a second. He says, even a little bit of connection with these 5 things, even done unconsciously, can have tremendous benefit. What to speak of if you do it intentionally. Those 5 things are associating with spiritually minded persons, associating with devotees, chanting Hare Krishna, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and other bhakti texts like Bhagavad Gita, living in a holy place, and worshiping the deity. It's 5 things. So here we're doing 3 of those things at least. We're always chanting Hare Krishna, we're always associating with devotees, and we're hearing the Bhagavad Gita. And also Prabhupada's quoting like Bhagavatam and so many things here. And I just quoted Chaitanya Charitamrita, etc. So we're doing like 3 very main ones. And then living in a holy place and worshiping the deity, like living in a holy place, like whether or not you go on pilgrimage exactly, you can also transform your home into a holy place and have a sacred place for your practice. And you can have even pictures of deities, pictures of the Lord, pictures of Krishna, pictures of your gurus and those teachers you're following, Srila Prabhupada and others, and like offer your food to them and have like that aspect in your life as well. But I would say of the 5, even that we're doing the 3 central ones: associating with devotees, hearing, and chanting. So those are actually the 3 main ones. And there is a nice verse by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the spiritual master of the spiritual master of the spiritual master of Srila Prabhupada, who quotes like an older teacher from hundreds of years ago, who says, if you can't do anything else, just sit down with the devotees. Just be around them. He says, actually, literally sit down with them. Because if you find somebody who has more momentum than you, you'll get pushed along. If you can't even chant, if you're so like, your mind is so distracted and you have so much going on, you like can't go to the Bhagavad Gita class, and you have like all these like mental, emotional things going on, financial troubles, just sit down with the devotees. Find yourself a devotee friend and hang out. Maybe they'll be offering food to Krishna. Maybe they'll be chanting. Maybe they'll serve you some prasadam, some spiritual food. Maybe they'll get you into kirtan. Maybe they'll share some wisdom from their practice. Maybe they'll chant with you, and by their mercy, you'll start doing things you couldn't even do on your own. So if you can't do anything else, just be with the devotees. And then pretty much dead center, like right next to that, is chanting Hare Krishna. And then this hearing process that we're all doing every week. If not every day, we should be reading every day. Why not a little bit, at least a few minutes every day. So those are the main things that you can do. And they qualify you for all advancement in spiritual life. And anything else you can do, you can fill the gaps with those things. Like if you want to start developing a little home practice for offering, a little fruit breakfast of cut fruit to your little pictures of Krishna or whatever, that's great. Do that. Or plan a pilgrimage with your local devotee friends who are going to be leading a pilgrimage to India or this Vrindavan, Mayapur. You could do that once a year or what have you. Or you can start, there's different things you can do. You can do this service or that service. We have a devotees offering flowers to Mahaprabhu. That's a service. It's actually technically under the umbrella of like deity worship or different things you can plug in. But the main things are those 5. Does that help?
Even just a little bit is better than nothing. And the more we can develop that taste, the, I guess, happier we'll be, the I don't know, the more direction we'll have as we kind of find the time and make the practice much more regular. It's like not saying like you have to do all these things and that's the only way, but if you want ultimate quote unquote enjoyment of your life, it's going to be focused on Krishna, and here are the things that help you get there. But it's not like he's keeping score of like, all right, how many pages did you read and how many of this and how many people, all that good stuff.
It's not, Krishna is not a lawyer. It's for our benefit. So whatever forward progress we make is eternal, it's beneficial, and it increases our attraction for the process and helps us ultimately more than anyone else. Definitely. Like what I'm hearing in your statement at the end there is just also a reminder to be like encouragement centered instead of shame centered. That's always worth remembering, because we can't do everything. And still the message of Bhagavad Gita is very, I would say, so far in my experience from reading it, is that it's very encouraging. Krishna's not trying to shame us, and he doesn't want us to shame ourselves or each other. Yeah. Thanks for that. Okay, what else? Any comments, questions, reflections? While I'm waiting for the next one, I did find another verse that I skipped over a little bit in the 13th chapter. I want to read it because it's beautiful. He says that in 13:29, one who sees the supersoul equally present everywhere in every living being does not degrade themselves by their mind. Thus they approach the transcendental destination. If you see this supersoul, this common element of the divine in everybody, you can't abuse them, can't exploit them. You know, like there's like a lot of studies done on how war crimes and things like that can happen. And the first step is you have to dehumanize the combatants or whatever have to dehumanize each other. Like they're not really people. They're subhuman. They're the enemy. They're this, they're that. It's like the opposite of spiritual vision. Spiritual vision is like whatever else is going on the external level, God is in my heart. I belong to that supreme, and they're also in this person's heart. And if you have that vision, Krishna says you cannot degrade yourself by your mind, even if they're mean to you, even if they're awful to you, violent to you, even if they're physically, mentally, emotionally, politically very different than you. You cannot exploit them or see them as separate from the Lord if you have this vision of the supersoul in their heart. You do not degrade yourself by material consciousness. Otherwise, at some point, everyone's going to have something different than other people, and we're going to see them as different and other. So this is actually another way of cultivating peace. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Samyaprasa Prabhu. I like when you started in 13:15, when you mentioned and read, we can't control what happens to us. And I know we always hear this. It's how you react to that. It comes from your soul. You can choose who you want to be. I just appreciated hearing that it comes from your soul. I think that's the super soul. That's what controls. And then the other part that stood out was you can cultivate your own direction. Like that's just knowing that, being reminded of that is important.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, in verse 21, Krishna said, nature is the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity, us, is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in the world. And then he goes on to talk about that by our association with different modes we cultivate. So it's not that things are happening to us. They're coming to us, but they're also coming as a result of our past activities, and our choices actually really are very honored. That even if we can't make it so we do the best thing, if we want to go towards Krishna, then that desire is something that the universe starts working around and facilitating. Because otherwise everything else that's happening to us, even materially, is also just being facilitated. It's all being facilitated. Nothing is happening purely on our strength, and nothing is happening outside of our choice either. Like we're always, our choices matter.
And that's just humbling, and I like that. And it's a nice reminder. I was just thinking something I heard last night of actually Vaisheshika Prabhu. I listened to an old reading, and he said you could take a piece of paper and you can draw a line down the middle, and you can just cut out a picture and put Krishna on one side, and then everything you do in the world, you can just draw a line across. And someone was like driving, and he was like, yes, think about how you can connect that to Krishna. You know, the roads, the sun, the other, you know, it's just so simple. And I think we overthink it, and everything is Krishna in different ways, and we hear it in different ways from different texts, which is nice.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
In many ways, Krishna consciousness is the practice, the science, the art of deliberately connecting our experience, our lives, our sense objects, our families, our bodies, and all these other things, our money, our time, energy, feelings, thought, body, endeavor, work, all of it with Krishna, deliberately. When you deliberately start doing that work of connecting, then it's like you get to spiritualize that part of your life, and everything is connectable. Everything is connectable. And that's where guidance and expertise comes in, but nothing's outside of Krishna. So certainly you can connect the driving You can think of Krishna driving Arjuna. Krishna was so kind that he drove Arjuna, became his charioteer. Or we can think about how we're all being led by our spiritual teachers. We have our maps and guides, and similarly we're driving. Or you can just listen to kirtan while you're driving. That's good too. Thank you. In fact, in the 18th chapter, Krishna says that the soul and the heart is like a chariot being driven along because of our karma. It's being pushed from one thing to another. We're like being driven along in a chariot. There's an elaborate analogy there of a chariot, which is like a old-fashioned kind of car. And when we get to the 18th chapter, I'll break down that analogy a little more, but it's a classic one. So stay tuned. Right. It is 7:30. We usually go a little later, and we can. Happy to hear more reflections, comments. Let's get at least one more. Something that stood out, was interesting, or you'll take with you, or you're impressed by reflecting on, or any questions. Alternately, I can also just share another really nice verse from the 13th chapter. I kind of sped through a little bit of the last few verses of the chapter just to get it in. But again, I just quoted 29 about, not degrading yourself by seeing the super soul present in everyone's heart. Also in verse 30, he says something really interesting. He says, one who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. In spiritual vision, we see that whatever actions are happening on the material platform are being performed by the combination or the interaction of the senses with the sense objects, right? But that the self, our actual self, is not in touch with matter and isn't made of matter. We're not actually doing anything. We're like in that chariot being driven in that way, but we're actually the driver. We're actually the driver. We're not the horses pulling. We're not the reins. We're not the chariot itself. This is a reference, an allusion that's going to be given, an analogy that's going to be given in the 18th chapter. We're not actually the body itself. We're not the mind. We're not the senses, but we're the driver. We're observing. So we're not actually doing, just like a driver in a car isn't like, they're not, consuming gasoline and making the pistons pump. They're not like burning rubber on the road and turning the wheel shaft and crank, and they're not actually doing that. We're not breathing, and we're not making our lungs breathe. The mechanism is doing that. So there's this distinction. Whereas material consciousness is like, I am that, right? I'm doing that. So like thinking you are the body, functioning like you are the body, being like completely situated in the body and not able to recognize your distinction from it. Does that make sense? All right. Any other reflections from the 13th chapter, or questions or comments before we end for the week? All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm glad we got to make it work. Thanks for bearing with me as we made it work without our dear Kelly, who is so integral, and without the one part Zoom link. We had to do a two-parter, but they're both recorded. They're both going to get on YouTube, and somehow we stuck it out. And I will send Kelly your love. Thank you. I'll remind her how important she is. She's taking care of something else right now. She couldn't be here. And I will see you next week. The same time as usual. And so for this week, continue through the 13th chapter. We picked up on text 13. Read the rest of the chapter, verses at least. I pointed out purport to 26 was really nice. Purport to 1326 is about hearing, if you want to read that. But you can definitely read as many purports as you want. Get as much of Prabhupada's wisdom. And comment at least one thing in the WhatsApp chat that stood out. Comments, questions, reflections. And It's great to get back in the flow with all of you. Great to see your faces and hear your voices. Thank you for your attentive ears. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Bhagavad Gita as it is, ki jai. And next week we'll go on chapter 14, which is one of the most practical and amazing chapters of Bhagavad Gita. It has my vote for maybe the most approachable chapter in the whole Gita, because if someone knows nothing about philosophy or God or whatever, there's actually a lot of good stuff in chapter 14 that makes sense right away on day one. So don't miss that. It's a treat. Hare Krishna. See you soon and have a wonderful week. Hare Bol.
Aloha. I think we're supposed
Aloha.
to say aloha too.
Mahalo, which means thank you also.
Mahalo.
Mahalo. Aloha.
Sure.